Hello, everybody. Everybody that's watching just came in early. I'm Derek with Marching Health. You all know me. I am here with Natalie Nation, who is nutrition extraordinaire. She runs the Feed That Nation social media pages as well as the Marching Nutritionist. Hello, Natalie.
Hi there.
Hey, so how about we'll start as we usually do. I figure most people who know us, Marching Health, probably know your work. You've done a lot of work with us. There's been a lot of collaboration. But for anybody who hasn't heard of you before, why don't you just give us sort of your background, how you got into drum corps, what your education is, where you've been, and where you're going.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Natalie Nation, and I am the marching nutritionist for those people who have seen me on Twitter, on Instagram, or even popping over to Marching Health every once in a while. I am a Minnesota girl at heart, and right now I am a Master's of Public Health student at the University of Minnesota, as well as a dietetic intern. So I am studying to become a registered dietitian, which is the medical nutrition expert of basically the healthcare world. I'm not there yet, so I can't call myself a dietitian, which is where the marching nutritionist comes in, because that's a bit more broad. But I've been doing drum corps and marching arts nutrition for about 4 years now. I never marched with a drum corps, but I loved high school marching band. And I sort of just fell in love with drum corps as a fan, and then realized at some point that drum corps is a really crazy athletic activity. And just like all sports, nutrition is a huge part of marching arts and drum corps. And I started thinking, is anyone actually paying attention to that? And it didn't really seem like anybody was. So I said, well, guess I'm going to do it. And I started to work with the Madison Scouts in, I think it was the end of 2016. And I worked with them in a variety of roles for the last several years. And then recently I created the Marching Nutritionist so that I could continue to share my knowledge and my excitement about drum corps nutrition with the rest of the community.
Well, that's really cool. It sounds like a story I've heard before. Like, oh, I know this thing. Like this I have this other area of expertise. I love marching arts. Are people doing that there? They aren't. Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
That was certainly my way of getting into it. I really love to see people with in other with other fields of expertise coming to the marching arts because there's so much of a need for it and there's so much work to be done. It's so cool. So thank you for doing what you're doing. You mentioned the terms dietitian and nutritionist, and you see those terms thrown around. And I'm thinking in particular, like I've seen a lot of Instagram influencers that call themselves like nutrition experts, when really all they're doing is looking skinny on Instagram. So like, what do those terms mean? What's your education? Can you clarify those terms a little bit?
Sure. So let's start with sort of the top, the hierarchy of nutrition experts. Above and beyond the registered dietitian or the registered dietitian nutritionist is considered in the healthcare world to be the expert. We go through a full bachelor's degree of nutrition and then either an internship or a master's degree in an internship or a doctorate in an internship in some cases, and then take a pretty extensive certification exam. And then every 5 years, you have to do a certain number of CEUs to keep up your credentials. So if you're speaking to a registered dietitian, these are the people who have studied the most, been to the most school nationwide. These are your experts. Leveling down from that, we have nutritionist, which is the category I fall under. It sort of depends on what state you're in, whether or not you can actually call yourself a nutritionist and what level of certification you need for that. So some places you can be a nutritionist and just be Joe Schmo on the street. Some places nutritionists have master's or professional's degrees. Some places they have certification exams they have to pass, but it's sort of hard to tell with nutritionists exactly what you're getting. So you have to research your professionals. Anyone who goes onto my professional pages will see that I'm a student, I'm learning, and I always try to say, like, this is not medical advice, this is educational. I can't give you medical advice yet. Um,
Hmm.
so that's the big difference. And then from there, you have like all level of healthcare professionals usually receive at least one nutrition class at some point, nurses, doctors, ATs, PTs, so forth. And we all have sort of the same knowledge of analyzing research, and we can all use PubMed and do keyword searches, but the level of nutrition expertise from other healthcare professionals sort of depends on their personal interest in it rather than anything they might have learned in school. And then going down from there, you have influencers who might have the background. Like there are some really great influencers who are also dietitians. And then there's some influencers who, like you said, are just skinny and know how to take good pictures. So do your research, folks.
Yeah. So you actually have some education in this. You've dedicated several years of your life to learning the science of we were just talking before this, and I
Yeah.
hadn't thought of it this way, like that there was this dimension to it, but not only the science of nutrition and physiologically, how it works in the body, but also the best practices as far as how to teach it, how to communicate it to people, and how to help people, um, how to help people make good decisions in their lives. So I
Yeah,
think that's a
exactly.
very important piece. Yeah. So with that, here's kind of the primary topic that I want to sort of cover today. So most of your work is with drum corps and other marching units, and so you've done a lot of work with how drum corps and marching athletes can best fuel their bodies to do their jobs. Right now, unfortunately, most of us can't do the drum corps thing, which is unfortunate. But there's a whole different thing going on, and that is the quarantine. It's having a big impact on our lives. Now, I've seen a lot of stuff, and I'm sure everybody else has too. A lot of stuff flying around the internet about like stuff like, oh, in this quarantine, you have all this extra time. You should be working out really heavy. You should be doing all this dieting. You should lose 15 pounds. And there's a lot of pressure coming from all directions to make these big changes. And I know that some people are reacting to that in different ways. What are your thoughts on that whole trend?
Gut reaction is that it's a bunch of nonsense.
Hmm.
I think people who are talking about how the public should be using this extra time that they have in quarantine to better themselves in some way. I'm using air quotes for anyone who's listening on the podcast version of this, that'll come later. But it's a very privileged thing to say that you have extra time to spend on your health or use your free time the way that you want to rather than the way that you have to. I mean, there are certainly healthcare professionals who are working incredibly hard right now who do not have the same free time that maybe you and I have as students. And there are certainly a lot of people working other essential jobs who definitely don't have the same time, free time that we do. And even more than that, I think it's absolutely nobody's business but your own business how you choose to spend your quarantine. And I think the pressure to be more productive, to change your body, to do all of these things simply because of this situation is kind of ridiculous because this is a really stressful situation. Like it's not just we're working from home. It's we're working from home because there's a crisis. It's not just that you're doing homeschool, it's that you're doing your school at home during a crisis. And I think that extra dimension of it is really multifaceted and it's really sucky when there's a lot of pressure coming from social media, coming from friends and family, coming from everywhere to tell you what you should be doing during this time because that's really nobody's business but your own.
Yeah, and that makes some sense to me. I happen to be in the very small, I imagine, portion of the population that I actually do have a lot more free time right now than I normally would. So I feel very fortunate in that way. But the my sort of priority in this whole thing, and I think this is the approach that I imagine you would endorse, is more trying to keep myself healthy and feel good and safe, and rather than trying to accomplish some goal, some goal of like losing a bunch of weight or lifting a bunch more, or whatever it might be. So, is that like a better focus, just staying healthy?
Yeah, I think to take that one step further, I would say my focus during this time, and certainly when I'm talking to other people about them to make their focus, just to care for themselves the best they can using the resources that are available to them.
Mhm.
And I think also to understand that it's okay to rest and it's okay not to be productive every moment of every day. And it's okay that you might not have access to the gym to do the workouts that you're used to. And it's okay that you can't find the groceries that you're used to at the store. Like, your healthy is going to look different maybe now than it did before, but it's all about doing your best and caring for yourself in the best ways that you currently can, rather than holding yourself to the standard of before or someone else's standard.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like that you threw in that other people's standard because like a good litmus test for whether or not your fitness goals are healthy in air quotes. Like if my fitness goals are dependent on someone else's opinion of me, then that's like a red flag. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad goal, but there's a chance that it might not be, a healthy way of thinking. Because like if it's dependent on somebody else's opinion, that's external. I don't have control over somebody else's opinion. We could go down that rabbit hole all day. That's some important stuff, and that makes perfect sense to me. Now, you mentioned resources. We all have different resources. We all have slightly different goals that we're trying to accomplish, and one thing that I think we all have in common, it's hard to find certain foods in this grocery store. Maybe some of us have a lot of time, some of us have a way less time right now. So I'm wondering like what you can share with us as far as ways that we can make use of the resources that we have, whether that be, not very much money or not very much time or what have you, to maximize what we get out of that as far as keeping ourselves healthy. And in terms of, your expertise is in nutrition. So like in terms of creating healthy meals that can really nourish us and make us healthy.
Yeah, I think all of this quarantine has sort of brought out this resurgence of the canned bean. And I am 100% in
Ooh.
favor of canned beans, dried beans, canned vegetables, canned fruits, shelf stable products in general, because I mean, nutrition Instagram and, Fitspiration Instagram and whatever you want to call it are going to say that processed foods are bad and processed foods are so unhealthy. But the reality is, processed foods are nutritious, like they provide you with nutrition. They're incredibly easy to access and they're relatively inexpensive. These are all great things.
Hmm.
And I think for people who are facing issues with finding what they need at the grocery store, which is something I definitely experienced. It was very weird to go to the grocery store and have a list and then realize that I guess I'm not going to be able to get the things on my list. But it's easier to make substitutions than you think. And
Hmm.
I guess it's not always as obvious. I mean, it's easy enough to swap out pinto beans for black beans, for example. That's going to be nutritionally almost the same and taste very similar and work the same way in recipes. But with something like if you're looking for canned tomato sauce or tomato puree, if you can't find it, what do you do? Well, can you buy a can of crushed tomatoes and whiz them through a food processor? Can you use a can of diced tomatoes instead? Can you use like spaghetti sauce or salsa instead of whatever you're going to use? So I
Mm.
think that's something that I've had to sort of work through experience because I've been cooking for so much, but it's easier than you think to make substitutions to find what works for you, even if you can't find it in the grocery store.
Oh yeah, and I can attest to the canned beans thing. I am a fan of beans. Now, let me tell you, because I mean, like one of the first things, at least where I am, the first thing to go was the chicken, and I've always been like I used to do bodybuilding and stuff. I was a bro, and so the whole thing about the bodybuilding community is all about like, oh, you got to get that chicken, you got to like, I don't know, grill the chicken and rice and broccoli, and that's all you eat. So chicken was my go-to, and it was gone. So I had to figure something else out. And my go-to was beans, because beans, as I understand it, they have lots of protein, they have lots of healthy fats, they just overall, and they have a lot of fiber. Overall, they're a very healthy thing to have, and they're super inexpensive. And you can do so many things with them. Like I could talk all day about how much I love beans now. So
We could
yeah,
do
I
a whole
think
separate podcast just about our love of beans.
ooh, Beancast. You heard it here first, folks. Everybody, pay attention. Coming down the tube, Beancast with Marching Health and, and Marching Nutritionist. Yeah, beans are awesome. I think that's one of the things that I guess has been my saving grace throughout this whole thing is just going on trying new recipes that I never thought of before, new like ways of preparing meals. Like I'm almost entirely vegetarian now, completely on accident because that's what's available and it's inexpensive. Um, so yeah, I think a lot of people have found themselves in this position where like they're at least I'm speaking for myself and I'm just imagining a lot of people in the same boat where I've had to learn a bunch of new skills as far as how to prepare food better and how to plan those things better. So, like, what do you think are some of the challenges that people face when they're first learning how to plan meals, prepare meals at home when they're used to things being a little more available and less constrained?
I think one of the issues I already mentioned was just having trouble finding the ingredients that you're used to, and making substitutions can be easy or hard depending on what you're trying to make. But I think another thing is that sometimes people, in the face of wanting to learn how to cook, sort of dive really far into the deep end and are trying to cook really intricate things with like 20 ingredients and 2 hours and a whole bunch of steps. And then that's obviously overwhelming and hard to do. And then, it doesn't turn out right, or it doesn't turn out the way they were expecting. And then they get frustrated and then go back to their ramen, which,
Mm.
if this is you, I hear you. Cooking takes time to learn and it can be tough. So I'm not trying to belittle that. I think it can be easy to start with what's familiar to you and build onto it. So for me, something I love to recommend to people, and people are always like, but you're the nutritionist. What are you doing? And I'm like, box, mac, and cheese. Because everybody knows how to cook box, mac, and cheese. And even if you don't, the instructions are literally right on the box. And then you can add to it, because you can do box mac and cheese with broccoli, or you can cook up box mac and cheese with a can of tomatoes and make like pizza mac, or you can do pesto mac and cheese, or you could do like mushrooms and peppers in your mac and cheese. And all of a sudden, I just listed like 4 different meals that you can make with box mac and cheese.
Yeah, there's no shame in using boxed mac and cheese. I remember when I was growing up, one of the staples in my house was macaroni and cheese with tuna and peas. And it rhymes, which is nice. So we box mac and cheese, and there was I forget what the ratio was. It'd be like a can of tuna per 2 boxes or something, and then some frozen peas and or canned peas, and just dump them in there, mix it all up. You got proteins, you got carbs, you got fats, you got veggies, you got everything you need, and it's not very expensive, very easy, and actually tastes really good. And so like it seems simple, but like and it is simple, but it's great. And I know what you mean by like my first step um, into trying to learn to cook. I like, you Google something. I want to make this thing. How do you make it? And it's this very fancy recipe with like, it's one of those recipes that starts off with the cook's like life story, you know, and then everybody experiences that. And it's this big long recipe and it's very intimidating. So, so yeah, that's wild. Are there any like, and that's so overwhelming, it can make you, it can stop your progress before it starts. So like, are there any, what are some dishes, you mentioned that one, or some other ones that you've made before that you think are really accessible and can be nutritious and affordable and all that stuff everybody loves?
Yeah, I really love doing, I've done this on my Instagram several times, but I'll do rice and I will roast broccoli in the oven till it's nice and crispy. And then I'll cook up a can of chickpeas with like paprika and garlic and salt and pepper. And then I'll have rice with crispy broccoli and crispy chickpeas. And then I'll eat it with like some kind of soy sauce type of sauce, or I'll like pour barbecue on it. And then I just have my dinner. And I think
Yeah.
it works. Like, you can do brown rice, white rice, you can do chickpeas or other beans, you could do like Mexican spices, or you could do other types of spices depending on what you like and what you're familiar with. You could do other vegetables besides broccoli, and it's like really versatile in that way. And I mean, my husband really likes it, so it's kind of a win-win for both of us.
So you roast the broccoli, right? So it gets all, okay. What, you said you cook the chickpeas. Is it the same with them? Do you roast them or how do you cook the chickpeas in
You
that one?
can roast them. If you're going to roast the broccoli and the chickpeas, I'd recommend doing them on separate trays so that you can, if the chickpeas finish before the broccoli, you can pull them out and they won't burn, or vice versa. I will usually rinse and drain them and then saute them in a pan with oil. And
Hmm.
then the trick to getting them crispy is to like not move them around a whole lot, because if you're constantly stirring them, then they can't build up the like crusty brown bits on them.
Mm.
You have to just like let them sit and leave them alone for a few minutes.
Okay, yeah. So like in there, they were like, that seems really simple. And like, it really is. And I've actually made meals like that accidentally. In fact, I might have been inspired by you. I don't know if I stole that idea from you or not, but I know I'd do it. Where we actually roast chickpeas and broccoli. The flavor combo that we stumbled upon that was really awesome was some garlic powder and cumin for some reason,
Yeah.
salt and pepper, just those four things: salt, pepper, garlic, and cumin. I always thought of cumin as like just kind of a side spice in like Mexican or maybe Indian dishes, but no, like by itself with garlic, it's so good. We did that with some. I've also gotten into oh, soy, pressed soy, tofu. There it is. So I forgot the word tofu for a second. Ooh. So yeah, pressed tofu. So we just, tofu, you drain it, you squeeze out all the water and whatnots, and frying that in a pan. It's so good, everybody. Let me tell you. And at least my grocery store here, chock full of tofu. Everybody's scooping up all the chicken, all the tofu in the world. It's awesome. So like sautéing things, super easy to do, and you can saute almost anything. Yeah, roasting things. The thing I like about roasting is you can roast anything, vegetables, meats, and you can get a lot of that yumminess, all that nutrition in, and you can make it taste really, really good. See, I'm getting really hungry now. I might
You
roast
just ate
something a
before
little
we got
later.
on the call.
Oh, see that I could just talk about this stuff. I've learned so many things. Let's see, what else do I got here? Oh, how about this? We've gone through these questions pretty quick. This is great. I didn't think we'd get to this, but I'm glad we did. You are a vegetarian, right?
Yep.
Awesome. So I know a lot of people who are vegetarians or vegans, they worry about having like getting enough nutrition, and I bet nowadays it's even harder for them. Getting all the nutrition, especially protein, is always the concern. So what's some advice you have for them to make sure that their meals are filling, nutritious, all that fun stuff?
Yeah, I think we've been talking about a whole bunch of recipes that are mostly vegetarian or easily made vegetarian or vegan. So I think starting with the basics, if you know how to cook pasta, if you know how to cook rice, if you know how to do two things to a can of beans and two things to some vegetables, like you've got a really solid base of knowledge to make a lot of different meals. I think also when it comes to me trying to feed myself as a vegetarian, and something I recommend to other people is not to get caught up in breakfast food is breakfast food, lunch food is lunch food, snack food is snack food. Like the other day, I literally had like leftover refried beans and like scrambled eggs for breakfast, and it was amazing.
That sounds awesome. I love eggs for breakfast every single day, let me tell you. If I ever do become fully vegetarian, I'm going to eat eggs all the time. I
Yeah,
love them.
I get most of my protein from eggs and dairy and like beans. So I'm definitely not vegan, but I think whether you're vegetarian or vegan, you, in order to be happy and like well nourished, you have to be willing to just eat a lot of different foods within the realm of foods that you eat. Because if you're vegan and you only eat broccoli, you're going to be pretty miserable. But if you're vegan and you eat broccoli, green beans, peas, onions, peppers, mushrooms, carrots, like you're going to be a very happy vegan.
Oh yeah. One of the things that I mean, I've been vegan restaurants, especially when I lived in DC. They're all over the place in DC, and the thing that really struck me about it was just the variety. Because there's, and when all you have to choose from is plants, you have to get creative. So like, there's such a variety of foods, and yeah, that kind of makes sense. You can't really get caught up as with this is a breakfast food, this is a dinner food, this is a lunch food. I just had an egg for dinner, and it was awesome. It was actually egg on an English muffin with pesto sauce. Is pesto a sauce? What is pesto?
I would consider pesto a condiment,
Okay.
but that's up for debate, obviously. If this is the thing people are gonna like attack me on Twitter for, then I'm okay with it. But I consider it a condiment, but people can have their own opinions.
Cool. If anybody, by the way, in the chat, anybody who's watching has any questions they want to toss out, we've got a few minutes left. I'm going to keep asking questions because I want to know everything. But if anybody has any questions, go ahead and throw them out. So I'm all about cooking, right? So I've learned to saute and I've learned to roast things. Like, are there any other, like, what are some skills that I could learn or anybody could learn cooking wise that would really open up a lot of avenues as far as dishes they could prepare?
Um, I think something, and this is more of a technique than anything else, but I have started to really love deglazing my pan. So for people who
Hmm.
don't know what deglazing is, you know when you're sautéing vegetables like onions or whatever, and there's that like brown filmy stuff on the bottom of the pan that gets stuck.
Hmm.
Deglazing is when you add a liquid to the pan to unstick it because all that brown stuff there is just really tasty, lovely flavor. And you want to get that flavor
Mm.
into whatever you're cooking. So if you're making chili or curry or whatever, you want to unstick all the brown stuff from the bottom of the pan so that it makes your food taste good. So I've been doing it. It works really well with water. It works with if I add like a can of tomatoes with liquid into like a chili, it'll unstick the bottom pretty well. Or if you're feeling fancy and you're over 21, you can just add a splash of like red or white wine, depending. And then if
Mm.
you're doing alcohol, obviously let it like reduce so you're not just like eating white wine chili. But
Sounds
I
wonderful.
I feel so fancy whenever I deglaze my pan with white wine, and I think it makes the food taste better, and it's really fun.
So like what's an example of so like it be after sautéing something specific? Like what's an example of some recipe in context where you might use that?
Sure. So the way I make chili is I take my onions and sometimes I do peppers or potatoes or carrots or other vegetables and I'll saute them in oil. And then once they start to get nice and brown, I'll add all the spices that I want to add and I'll just toast the spices for like 2 minutes. So then at that point,
Mm.
there's not only brown veggie bits all over the bottom of the pan, but there's toasty spices all over the bottom of the pan. So then
Mm.
from there, I'd add a splash of white wine and stir everything around, unstick all the brown stuff from the bottom of the pan. And then I'd add tomatoes, cans of beans, corn, carrots, like whatever else. Whatever you have in your pantry that you think would be good in a chili is probably going to be good in chili because chili's really hard to screw up. And
Hmm.
then you cook it down until the tomatoes are nice and like thick. You don't want like the raw canned tomato taste. And then
Almost sneezed.
And then right at the end, I always taste my chili again. And then usually it needs a little more salt, maybe some lime juice or garlic or something, and then it's good to go.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I know like making chili is like a dark art. You know, everybody's very particular about it. But I mean, it doesn't sound too hard. I never thought of that like that brown sticky stuff. That's all flavor. That makes perfect sense. I'm totally gonna try that. I'm gonna look that up because I'm gonna. I bet that could make some of the because like the whole idea is I'm trying to make dishes that might be bland, make them exciting, make them fun. Like because if you're trying to eat healthy, people have this idea that healthy equals not tasty, and like doesn't need to be the case. So, so yeah, that's good information. Well, we are almost out of time here. Is there anything else that you would like to add? Anything you want to tell the people about?
Um, well, people should go and follow me on Instagram at the Marching Nutritionist. And I actually, for any band directors out there who are listening, I know our Facebook crowd tends to be a little bit older. I actually just came out with a handout aimed specifically at band directors, and it's called the Show Day Snack Guide. So, talking about what to feed your group on a show day, a whole big list of snacks that you can tell your volunteers to bring in or purchase for your kids. It talks about handling kids with food allergies and food safety. And if you're a band director, go check it out. The link is in my Instagram and my Twitter, which is at March_nutrition because Twitter has a character limit for handles, unfortunately.
You had to cut off marching_nutrition. Awesome. So you've got that. You've also have is Feed That Nation. Is that like that's also one of your handles, right?
Yeah, so I like to call it my alter ego. So
Ah.
outside of marching, I produce health, nutrition, and college related content for college kids. So I have YouTube videos, I have podcasts, and I goof around on my Instagram a lot.
Hmm.
So if people want to follow me over there too, they definitely can. That's at Feed That Nation, and that's Instagram, and that's my podcast name, and that's my YouTube channel name. My last name is Nation, so kind of makes sense.
Uh, it all makes sense now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
I
it's a
can.
lot
I
different than marching, which is why I have the two different accounts.
right. I can personally vouch for both of those. I don't know where you do most of your cooking tutorials, but wherever that is that the Feed That Nation?
It's kind of both. It's a little bit of both.
Okay, 'cause wherever you're doing that, I've been following your all of your Instagram stuff lately, and I've stolen a few of your recipe ideas and learned a few things about cooking techniques. So if you're out there and you're listening and you want to like get some ideas of things you can cook that are very accessible, very easy, and all very nutritious, I would highly recommend following Natalie. Feed That Nation and Marching Nutritionist on all the things because she's putting out some good stuff all the time. Cannot recommend it enough. So thanks, Natalie, for coming on and talking to us. It's always a great time. We should do another one of these sometime and talk about more stuff because there's always more
Bean
stuff to talk
fast.
about. Bean casts. Woo! It's all about the beans, everybody. All right. Thanks, everybody, for coming in, and
Thanks,
we'll
guys.
see you next time.